My sister asked me for $6,850 for a luxury party. When I checked the vendor contracts, I froze. She had secretly put everything under my name and credit card, so I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 35 years old, and if you had asked my family who I was, they probably would have said something like, Rachel always figures things out. What they really meant was, Rachel always pays when things fall apart. That Saturday morning started quietly, the kind of morning I usually looked forward to all week. I had a mug of coffee sitting next to my laptop, sunlight coming through the kitchen window, and absolutely no reason to rush anywhere. I had opened my savings account for one reason only. I wanted to see how close I was. For almost 2 years, I'd been putting money aside to buy my first townhouse. Nothing extravagant, just a place that was mine. Somewhere I wouldn't have to wonder if my rent was going up again or if I'd need another roommate someday. I smiled when I saw the number on the screen. I wasn't there yet, but I was close enough that it finally felt real. Then my phone buzzed. Melissa, my older sister. I glanced at the preview before unlocking the screen. Hey, I need a huge favor. I let out a quiet breath. Funny how sometimes a single sentence can tell you exactly where a conversation is going. I opened the message. We're a little short for Chloe's 17th birthday party. Can you send $6,850 today? I'll explain everything later. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it, because it was written like the answer had already been decided. No, if you can. No, would you consider it? Just, can you send it today? I looked back at my savings balance, then back at the message. Almost $7,000 for a birthday party. I set my phone face down on the table and took another sip of coffee. It had already started getting cold. Most people would have probably laughed and assumed it was a joke. I didn't, because this wasn't unusual. Not the amount, maybe. But the request? That part felt strangely familiar. Melissa wasn't the only one either. Over the years, my family had developed a habit I didn't notice until much later. They rarely called just to catch up. Birthdays, holidays, random Tuesdays. Somehow every conversation eventually drifted toward money. Someone's car had broken down. Someone needed help covering tuition. A medical bill couldn't wait. An apartment deposit was due. There was always something. And somehow, I usually became part of the solution. At the time, I never questioned it. Families help each other. That's what I believed. Besides, I had a stable career. I worked as a financial compliance analyst, and while I wasn't wealthy by any stretch, I earned enough to help now and then. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Melissa. The venue needs the payment today. A few seconds later, please don't overthink this. I couldn't help smiling a little. She'd known me my entire life. She knew telling me not to overthink something almost guaranteed I would. I closed my laptop instead of replying. Outside, I could hear one of my neighbors washing his truck while kids rode their bikes down the street. It was an ordinary Saturday for everyone else. Mine suddenly didn't feel so ordinary anymore. I picked up my coffee and walked onto the small patio behind my apartment. Normally, Melissa would have sent me pictures first. Maybe Chloe trying on dresses? Maybe samples of decorations. She loved sharing those things. Today, there were no pictures. No excitement. Just a dollar amount. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I unlocked my phone again and scrolled through our previous conversations. The last few months blurred together. A quick question, a favor, another favor, a reminder, a thank you. Then silence. I frowned. When was the last time she'd called just to ask how I was doing? I honestly couldn't remember. That realization sat heavier than the request itself. The money wasn't even the first thing bothering me anymore. It was the feeling that somewhere along the way, our conversations had quietly turned into transactions. I stared at Melissa's message one more time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I started typing, then deleted it. Started again. Deleted it again. Instead of answering right away, I locked my phone, set it back on the table, and decided Melissa was going to have to wait a little longer for my response. I tried to go back to my Saturday like nothing had happened. The laundry still needed to be folded. My grocery list was sitting on the counter. I'd even promised myself I'd spend an hour comparing mortgage rates before lunch. Instead, I kept reaching for my phone. Not to answer Melissa. Just to look at the message again. It was strange how one text could follow you around the house. I folded 2 towels before stopping halfway through. I opened the refrigerator, then realized I wasn't even hungry. The coffee I'd made earlier had gone completely cold, but I drank it anyway while staring out the kitchen window. My mind wasn't on the party anymore. It was on us. Melissa and I used to talk all the time. When we were younger, she'd call to complain about work, tell me funny stories about Chloe, or ask if I wanted to meet for dinner after work. We didn't need a reason. Somewhere along the way, those conversations disappeared so gradually that I couldn't even point to when it happened. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through our message history. There were birthday photos, holiday greetings, a few family jokes. But between those, "Can you help me just this once? We're in a tight spot. I'll pay you back as soon as things settle down." Different years, different situations, the same opening every time. I kept scrolling. It wasn't only Melissa. My younger brother had started conversations almost the same way. Even my parents sometimes opened with, "Do you have a minute?" And somehow that minute always turned into a discussion about bills, repairs, or unexpected expenses. I leaned back in my chair and laughed quietly to myself. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe I had never noticed the pattern before. Or maybe I'd noticed it and simply chose not to think too hard about it. Helping never felt like a burden in the beginning. If my family needed me, I wanted to be there. Isn't that what most people would do? I remembered lending Melissa money years earlier when Chloe needed dental work. Another time it was because her car transmission failed right before she started a new job. Those situations felt urgent, real, no hesitation. I sent the money because I knew I'd want someone to help me if our roles were reversed. At least, that's what I believed. My phone buzzed again. "Melissa, did you see my message?" I didn't answer. A minute later, another one appeared. "The event coordinator keeps asking me when we're sending the payment." We. That tiny word caught my attention. Not I. Not our family. We. I locked my phone again. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe she was stressed. Planning a party for a teenager wasn't exactly relaxing. I tried giving her the benefit of the doubt. Around noon, I drove to a nearby grocery store to grab a few things I'd been putting off all week. Nothing exciting. Fruit, milk, coffee beans. The kind of boring errands that usually helped clear my head. While I was comparing 2 brands of cereal, someone called my name. "Rachel?" I turned and saw Mrs. Alvarez, one of our old neighbors from the street where Melissa and I grew up. She smiled the second she recognized me. "Oh my goodness, it's been forever. How are you?" We talked for a few minutes. She asked about work. I asked about her grandchildren. It felt normal, simple. Then she said something she probably didn't think twice about. "I saw Melissa a couple weeks ago. She told me you're always saving the day. Your family is lucky to have you." I smiled automatically. "She's kind." Mrs. Alvarez laughed. "No, she's serious. She said whenever something unexpected comes up, Rachel takes care of it." She meant it as a compliment. I knew she did. But hearing it from someone outside the family landed differently. I wasn't sure why. We said goodbye, and I finished shopping. But those words stayed with me all the way home. Rachel takes care of it. Was that really how everyone saw me now? Not Rachel the sister, not Rachel the aunt, not Rachel who loved hiking on weekends or obsessed over finding the perfect townhouse. Just the person who took care of things. I carried the grocery bags inside and set them on the kitchen counter without unpacking them. My phone was still sitting where I'd left it. Melissa hadn't texted again. For several minutes, I simply looked at her name on the screen. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for everything. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild over one expensive birthday party. There was one easy way to find out. I picked up my phone, found Melissa's contact, and pressed the call button. Melissa answered on the second ring. "Oh, good. I was starting to think you were ignoring me." I smiled a little, hoping to keep the conversation light. "I wasn't ignoring you. I just wanted to think before I answered." "Well, don't think too long," she said with a short laugh. "Everything's happening so fast." I leaned against the kitchen counter while she talked. "So, tell me about the party." That was all the invitation she needed. Her voice immediately brightened. "Oh, Rachel, it's going to be beautiful. Chloe only turned 17 once. We're doing it at the Fairmont Country Club. They just remodeled their ballroom and it's gorgeous." She barely paused for a breath. "The florist is making this incredible floral arch for the entrance. It's all white roses with little gold accents. Then there's this dessert table everyone keeps talking about. You should see the pictures. It's almost too pretty to eat." I listened quietly. She went on about the live band she'd booked instead of a DJ because it felt more elegant. Then she described a custom dress Chloe had been fitted for, matching table settings, personalized party favors, and a photographer who specialized in luxury events. She sounded excited. Not nervous, not stressed. Just excited. Every few seconds she asked things like, "Can you picture it?" Or, "Doesn't that sound amazing?" "It sounds like you've planned a lot," I said. "I know," she laughed. "I've been working on this for months." Months? That word caught my attention. "So you've been planning this for a while?" "Since early spring." I glanced toward my laptop, still sitting closed on the dining table. Wow. I just want Chloe to have something she'll remember forever. I get that. And honestly, Melissa continued, she deserves it. I agree. There was a brief pause. The first real pause since she'd answered. I figured this was probably the right moment. "So, how much has everything cost so far?" "Oh," she said casually. "You know, parties add up." "I know they do. The ballroom wasn't cheap. I'm sure. And flowers are ridiculous these days." "I've heard." She laughed again. "Seriously, everything costs more now." I waited. She didn't continue. Instead, she changed the subject. "You should have seen Chloe when she tried on the dress. She almost cried." "Really?" "It was adorable." I smiled because I could easily imagine it. Chloe had always been expressive. Even as a little girl, every emotion showed on her face. She must have loved it. She did. Another pause. I realized we were drifting away from the question. "So, where does the 6,800 come in?" There was silence for just a second. "It's just what we're short." "Short on what exactly?" "The final payments." "For the party." I waited again. Nothing. No breakdown. No numbers. Just another broad answer. I wasn't trying to interrogate her. I genuinely wanted to understand. "Melissa," I said carefully, "I'm not saying no." "I know. I just need to know what I'm paying for." "You'd be helping with everything." "Right, but what does everything mean?" She sighed, though not angrily. "Rachel, you're making this sound way more complicated than it is." "I don't think I am." "It's a party." "I know. And we're just short." "I understand that." She hesitated. Then her voice softened. I've already signed everything. That made me stop. You already booked it all? Well, yeah. Before you had the money? We expected we'd have it. We? Our family. The words hung there for a moment. I wasn't even sure she realized what she'd said. You mean you expected everyone would pitch in? Exactly. And the venue let you reserve everything already? They needed a deposit. So you've already committed to all these vendors? Most of them, yes. There it was. The first concrete piece of information I'd gotten since this whole conversation started. The plans weren't hypothetical anymore. The contracts were already in motion. I rubbed my forehead and looked out the kitchen window. Kids were still riding bikes up and down the street like nothing in the world was complicated. Inside my apartment, everything suddenly felt a little less simple. Melissa cleared her throat. So, can I tell them we're okay? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled a chair out from the table and sat down. Melissa? Yeah? Can you send me the budget? Just the full breakdown. Venue, catering, decorations, everything. For a couple of seconds, all I could hear was Melissa breathing on the other end of the line. Then she let out a little laugh. Not a nervous laugh. More like I'd asked something unexpectedly funny. Rachel, she said, you're unbelievable. I frowned. What do you mean? Only you would ask for a spreadsheet before helping your own sister. I didn't ask for a spreadsheet. You basically did. I asked for the budget. She laughed again, softer this time. I swear, you've been working in compliance for too long. Normally, I would have laughed with her. This time, I didn't. I'm just trying to understand what I'm paying for. I already told you. You told me about flowers, the band, and the venue. Exactly. But not the numbers. There is another pause. You really need every receipt? No. Every invoice? No. So what do you want? I just want a breakdown. She sighed. I don't have it sitting in front of me. That's okay, you can send it later. I've got a million things going on. I understand. I don't have time to organize paperwork. I'm not asking you to organize anything. Then what are you asking? Her voice had changed. It wasn't angry. It was impatient. Like we were suddenly having two completely different conversations. I kept my own voice calm. I'm asking because it's a big amount, Melissa. It's a birthday party. It's almost $7,000. For Chloe. I know it's for Chloe. And she's your niece. I know that too. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I could hear someone talking in the background on her end. Then a door closed. When Melissa came back, her tone was quieter. Rachel, families don't do this. Do what? Audit each other. I'm not auditing you. It feels like it. I rubbed my forehead. I haven't even said no. I know. I'm just asking questions. And I'm telling you this isn't about numbers. Then what is it about? It's about showing up. That answer lingered for a second. I understood what she meant. At least I thought I did. But something still didn't sit right. I can show up, I said. And still understand where the money's going. She exhaled slowly. You've always trusted me before. I've trusted you plenty of times. So why is this different? It was a fair question. I looked around my apartment as if the answer might be written somewhere on the walls. Nothing had changed. The same kitchen, the same dining table, the same Saturday afternoon. Yet this conversation felt completely unfamiliar. I don't know, I admitted honestly. I stopped myself. What? I think maybe I'm just trying to be more careful. Careful with me? Careful with money. She gave a short laugh that didn't sound amused. You know what's funny? What? If Mom needed surgery tomorrow, you wouldn't ask for a budget. No. If Dad's roof collapsed, you wouldn't ask for receipts. Those aren't the same. They're both family. I took a slow breath before answering. I don't think a medical emergency and a luxury birthday party belong in the same conversation. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she asked something I wasn't expecting. So that's what you think this is? What? A luxury party? I hesitated. You described a country club, a live band, custom flowers. I wanted one nice thing for my daughter. I'm not saying she doesn't deserve a nice birthday. It doesn't sound like that. It isn't about Chloe. Then why does it feel like you're making it about everything except her? I closed my eyes for a second. This conversation was slipping somewhere I hadn't intended. I wasn't accusing her of anything. I wasn't trying to embarrass her. I simply wanted information. Somehow, that simple request had turned into a debate about trust. Melissa spoke again, much more quietly. I thought you'd be the easiest person to ask. The sentence landed differently than everything else she'd said. Not because it made me feel guilty, because it sounded rehearsed. Like she'd already decided how this conversation was supposed to go. I looked at my phone screen. The call had already lasted almost 20 minutes, and somehow, I still didn't know how much the ballroom cost, or the catering, or the flowers, or the photographer. Not one number, not a single one. I swallowed and kept my voice as gentle as I could. I'm not saying yes or no today. So what are you saying? I'm saying I'd really like to see the budget before I make a decision. Silence. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, Melissa spoke. I'll see what I can find. Okay. Talk to you later. You too. The line disconnected. I set my phone on the table and stared at the blank screen for a long moment. I couldn't remember another conversation with my sister that had ended like that. Monday morning felt comfortingly predictable. By 8:30, I was sitting at my desk with a cup of fresh coffee, my inbox already filling faster than I could answer it. Our compliance team had a quarterly review coming up, and everyone seemed to have one last question before reports were finalized. It was the kind of work I genuinely enjoyed. Not because it was exciting. Most people would probably call it boring, but I liked solving puzzles. I liked finding the small details that everyone else skipped. One missing document, one unexplained payment, one signature in the wrong place. Those little things usually told a much bigger story. Around 10, my manager, Daniel, stopped by my desk. You have a minute? Sure. He handed me a file. Vendor reconciliation. Finance says everything balances. I want another set of eyes before we sign off. Got it. I know you'll find anything unusual. He smiled and walked away. That wasn't unusual either. People trusted me to notice things. Sometimes I wondered if I noticed too much. I opened the report and started comparing invoices against approved payments. Invoice, purchase order, approval, payment. Everything had to match. If something didn't, there had to be a reason. About 20 minutes in, I spotted a payment that had been processed a week earlier than expected. Not fraud, just inconsistent timing. Still worth asking about. I picked up the phone and called someone in accounting. Hey Lisa, quick question about invoice 48217. She laughed. I knew you'd find that one. It looked odd. It does, she admitted. Vendor changed the billing schedule. We documented it Friday. She emailed me the supporting paperwork before we even finished talking. Problem solved. Less than 2 minutes. Simple, transparent, documented. I thanked her and moved on. Somewhere in the middle of reviewing another file, my thoughts drifted back to Melissa. Without meaning to, I compared the two situations. At work, nobody took offense when I asked for documentation. Nobody accused me of being cold. Nobody said, just trust me. They simply answered the question. Because that was normal. I leaned back in my chair for a second. Maybe that was the part bothering me. It wasn't that Melissa needed help. It was how uncomfortable she became the moment I asked for information. A notification popped up on my screen. Not work. A family group chat. Melissa had shared another picture. This time it was a mock-up of the party decorations. White flowers, gold accents, crystal candle holders. Someone immediately commented with heart emojis. Mom wrote, "It's going to be absolutely beautiful." My younger brother added, "Can't wait." I stared at the screen for a moment. No mention of money, no mention of budgets, just excitement. I almost typed, "Did you find that breakdown?" Instead, I closed the chat without replying. By lunchtime, I was sitting outside the office with a salad I barely touched. One of my coworkers, Nina, sat across from me. "You okay?" she asked. "You've been quieter than usual." I smiled. "Family stuff." She nodded immediately. "Those two words explain a lot." We both laughed. "You don't have to tell me," she added, "but whatever it is, don't let it ruin your whole week." "I'll try." She changed the subject after that, telling me about her son's soccer tournament. I appreciated that. Not every conversation needed to become therapy. By the end of the afternoon, I'd reviewed 4 reports, answered dozens of emails, and signed off on 2 compliance files. Everything had an explanation. Everything left a trail. Everything made sense. I packed my laptop into my bag and headed home just as the sun was starting to dip lower. The drive was quiet. No music. Just enough time to think. When I unlocked my apartment, the silence felt different from Saturday. Less peaceful. More expectant. I set my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight to the small desk in my living room. My personal laptop was exactly where I'd left it. I hesitated for only a second. Then I opened it. A folder sat near the top of my desktop. It had been there for years. I had named it something simple: Family Transfers. I clicked on it. The folder opened almost instantly. Inside were dozens of PDFs, screenshots of bank transfers, confirmation emails, and scanned receipts. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Honestly, I just wanted to remind myself how often I'd helped over the years. I clicked the oldest file first, $500. Melissa. The note beside the transfer read, "Emergency car repair." I smiled without thinking. I remembered that day. Chloe had been around 6 years old. Melissa's car had broken down outside her daycare, and she called me nearly in tears because she couldn't afford the repair until payday. I didn't hesitate. I sent the money while I was sitting at my desk, and that was the end of it. At least, that's how I remembered it. The next file was for my younger brother. $1,200, apartment security deposit, then another, $875. Dad, home insurance deductible after a storm. Another, Mom, unexpected dental work. Each transfer brought back a memory. Not because of the money, because I remembered the conversations. I hate asking. "I'll get it back to you. You're saving us. Just this one time." Back then, I believed every single one of those promises. I wasn't keeping records because I expected repayment. That folder existed for one reason: organization. Working in compliance had turned me into the kind of person who kept documents for everything: taxes, insurance, home expenses, even old utility bills. Saving family transfers alongside everything else had simply become a habit. I leaned closer to the screen and kept scrolling. The years blurred together. One request became another, sometimes only a month apart, sometimes only a couple of weeks. The file names kept going and going. I frowned. "There's no way," I whispered it to myself. I had never counted them before. I never felt the need. Whenever someone asked for help, I looked at my account, made sure I could afford it, and sent the money. Then life moved on. Or at least, I thought it did. I switched the folder view into a detailed list. The scroll bar on the side suddenly looked much smaller than I expected. There were far more entries than I remembered creating. I slowly dragged it downward. Every year had its own collection of files. Some months had 3 or 4 different transfers. I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, because my memory had completely betrayed me. If someone had asked me before that evening how many times I'd helped my family over the last decade, I probably would have guessed. Maybe 15. 20. Looking at the folder, it was obvious I'd been wrong. Very wrong. I got up from my chair and walked into the kitchen. The groceries I'd bought on Monday were finally unpacked, but I hadn't even thought about making dinner yet. I poured myself a glass of water and stood there for a minute. My apartment was completely quiet. Normally, silence helped me think. Tonight, it only made the clicking of my keyboard seem louder every time I returned to the desk. I sat back down and continued scrolling. Every file represented a moment I'd barely remembered until now. One transfer helped cover a utility bill after Dad retired. Another paid for moving expenses when Melissa changed apartments. There were school fees, medical copays, car repairs, plane tickets for a family emergency, holiday expenses that were supposedly temporary. None of those decisions had felt unreasonable on their own. That's what surprised me the most. If you'd shown me any single transaction by itself, I probably would have made the same decision again. It wasn't one request. It was the accumulation, like raindrops filling a bucket so slowly you never noticed the water rising. My phone vibrated on the desk. For a second, I thought it might be Melissa finally sending the budget she'd promised. Instead, it was a promotional text from my bank. I almost laughed again. Wrong message. I put the phone face down and looked back at the folder. There had to be a better way to understand what I was looking at. Just scrolling through file names wasn't enough anymore. If I really wanted to know how much I'd helped, or whether my memory was missing something else, I'd have to stop skimming. I rested my hand on the mouse, opened the first transfer in the list, and decided I was going to examine every single transaction one by one. The first transfer took less than a minute to review. The second took 2. By the 10th one, I had stopped looking at the dollar amounts first. Instead, I started reading the notes I'd written beside each payment. Car repair. Emergency dental bill. Community college tuition. Moving truck deposit. Apartment application fee. Medical copay. Temporary childcare. Each description brought back a different chapter of our family's life. Melissa's transmission had failed right before she started a new job. Dad had slipped on the back porch one winter and needed physical therapy sessions insurance wouldn't fully cover. My younger brother had finally found an apartment after months of sleeping on a friend's couch. At the time, every situation felt urgent. Every phone call sounded different. Every reason seemed completely valid. Looking back, I couldn't honestly say I'd been manipulated into helping. Most of those moments were real. Life happens, cars break down, people get sick, jobs disappear, families step in. That's what I believed then. Honestly, I still believed it. Helping wasn't the part I regretted. I clicked through another folder. Melissa had sent me a picture years ago of Chloe holding up her acceptance letter for a summer academic program. I remembered how excited she sounded on the phone. "We're just short on the registration fee," she'd said. I transferred the money before we even hung up. A week later, she texted me pictures of Chloe smiling on campus. I smiled at the memory. That one still felt good. Not every file made me uncomfortable. Some reminded me why I'd always said yes. My family wasn't made up of bad people. They were people who had gone through difficult seasons, and I wanted to believe I'd made those seasons a little easier. That thought stayed with me for a while. Then I noticed something else. None of these files had any paperwork attached beyond the payment confirmation. No repayment schedule, no written agreement. Not even a simple text saying, "I'll send it back by this date." Just conversations. Promises made over the phone. Messages like, "I won't forget this. We'll figure it out as soon as things calm down." I wasn't expecting legal contracts with my own family. That would have felt ridiculous. Still, Seeing years of transactions laid out in front of me made one thing obvious. Everything had depended on trust, nothing else. I opened another transfer, then another. Around an hour passed without me noticing. The room had grown darker outside, and I finally reached over to switch on the lamp beside my desk. Its warm light spread across the keyboard and the stack of unopened mail sitting nearby. My stomach reminded me I still hadn't eaten dinner. I ignored it. I wanted to keep going while everything was fresh. The more files I reviewed, the more one pattern kept repeating. Someone called. There was a problem. I helped. Life moved on. There was never a conversation weeks later saying, "Hey, let's settle up." Sometimes people thanked me. Sometimes they didn't. Neither had ever bothered me before. But tonight, it felt strange how naturally everyone, including me, had accepted that the story simply ended with my payment. No follow-up, no plan, just the next emergency. I stretched my shoulders and reached for my water glass. Empty. I hadn't even noticed. I stood up, refilled it, and glanced at the clock. Almost 9. I'd been sitting there much longer than I'd intended. When I returned to my chair, I sorted the folder by payment method instead of date. Mostly bank transfers, a few checks. Then something unfamiliar caught my eye. The payment description looked ordinary. The amount wasn't unusually large, but the method listed underneath made me stop. Credit card transaction. I frowned. That's odd. I clicked it open. I didn't remember using my credit card for this one. Maybe I'd forgotten. It had been years. That was possible. I opened the receipt attached to the file, expecting my memory to come back the moment I saw it. Instead, I stared at the screen a little longer than I expected. I couldn't remember approving that payment at all. I zoomed in on the receipt, thinking maybe I was overlooking something obvious. The merchant name didn't ring a bell. The amount wasn't outrageous. It was just under $900. The date was from almost 5 years earlier. I leaned back and tried to remember where I had been that week. Nothing. Usually, all it took was seeing a receipt for the memory to come back. I could remember paying for my own vacations from years ago. I could remember buying furniture for my apartment. This one felt blank. I opened the credit card statement that matched the same month. There it was again. Same merchant, same amount. Posted to my account. I frowned. Okay. Maybe Melissa had called me while I was at work, and I'd agreed to cover it. Maybe I'd paid over the phone without saving the details in my head. That wasn't impossible. I searched my email for the merchant's name. A confirmation email appeared almost immediately. I clicked it. The receipt wasn't addressed to Melissa. It was addressed to me. Billing name, Rachel Monroe. Well, that made sense. It was my credit card. But the service itself wasn't for me. The event location listed on the receipt wasn't anywhere near my apartment. I searched my calendar from that year. I hadn't even been in that city that weekend. I rubbed my eyes. Something wasn't adding up. Not fraud. At least I didn't think so. The charge had been paid years ago without dispute. If someone had stolen my card, I would have noticed. No. This felt different. More like something I'd agreed to once and completely forgotten. I opened another credit card transaction from the folder. Different year, different merchant. Another family-related expense. Again, my card. Again, the billing confirmation carried my name. I kept clicking. A third one. Then a fourth. My heartbeat picked up just a little. Not because the amounts were huge, because I hadn't expected to find more than one. Each transaction had a perfectly legitimate explanation written in the notes beside it. Temporary reservation. Emergency payment. Holding deposit. Those comments sounded familiar. They sounded like something I would have accepted without much discussion. Still, why couldn't I remember authorizing them? I reached for my phone and almost called Melissa. My thumb hovered over her name, then I stopped. If my memory was wrong, I'd end up accusing her of something that never happened. That wasn't fair. I needed facts first. I set the phone back down. This wasn't personal yet. It was research. That's how I approached difficult situations at work. Start with the documents. Build the timeline. Ask questions later. I returned to the folder and sorted everything by payment method again. More credit card charges appeared than I expected. Not dozens, but enough to catch my attention. Some were deposits. Others were partial payments. One had a note beside it that simply said, "Vendor requested immediate payment." I couldn't remember which vendor, or why they had requested it. I searched my email again. This time, instead of using family names, I searched by merchant. Several confirmation emails appeared. Some included attachments I hadn't opened in years. I glanced at the clock. It was after 10. Normally, by this hour, I'd already be getting ready for bed. Instead, I found myself opening document after document, trying to reconstruct conversations I'd barely remembered having. Outside, the apartment complex had gone quiet. Inside, the only sound was my laptop fan humming softly. I realized something that made me pause. I wasn't actually looking for proof that anyone had done something wrong. I was trying to understand my own records. That thought mattered. Because if I let frustration get ahead of facts, I'd miss something important. I took a deep breath, grabbed a notebook from my desk drawer, and started writing down dates, merchant names, amounts, payment methods, anything that repeated. A pattern was beginning to emerge. I just couldn't see the full picture yet. One email near the bottom of the search results caught my attention. Unlike the others, it included several attachments instead of one. I clicked on it, waited for the files to load, and reached for my notebook. Whatever answers were there, they weren't going to come from my memory anymore. They were going to come from the paperwork. The first attachment was exactly what I expected. A receipt. The second was an invoice. The third was something I didn't expect at all. It was an email chain. I clicked it open and slowly scrolled from the top. The conversation had taken place almost 4 years earlier. I barely remembered the situation. Melissa had been organizing a family event after Dad's retirement, and everyone had been pitching in somehow. At least, that's what I thought I remembered. The first few messages were harmless. A vendor confirming availability. Questions about dates. Estimated pricing. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed something. The vendor wasn't emailing Melissa anymore. They were emailing me. I frowned and checked the recipient line. Rachel Monroe. Not copied, not included with everyone else. Just me. Maybe Melissa had forwarded the conversation. That would make sense. I looked closer. No, the emails weren't forwarded. They were original messages sent directly from the vendor. I clicked another attachment. Same thing, a different company. Another invoice. Again addressed to me. I sat back in my chair. Why would they send this to me? I wasn't asking anyone. The apartment was silent. I searched for another merchant from my notebook. 3 more emails appeared. One confirmed a deposit. Another reminded me that a balance would soon be due. The last one thanked me for my business. My business? I almost laughed. I had no idea who these people were. The wording sounded as though I'd been the customer from the beginning. I opened the message details. Sometimes email headers reveal more than the message itself. The sender. The date. The recipients. Nothing looked fake. Nothing suggested fraud. These were normal business emails. Professional. Routine. I rubbed my temples. The longer I looked, the stranger it became. At work, this was exactly how vendors communicated with whoever was financially responsible for an account. Not necessarily the person using the service, the person expected to handle payments. That thought made me uncomfortable. I searched another year. Another merchant. Another invoice. Again. straight to me. I wasn't seeing one isolated mistake anymore. I was seeing a pattern. Not every family expense worked this way. Most of the transfers had been simple. Bank payment, text message, done. But whenever a vendor was involved, my name kept appearing. I reached for my notebook again. Instead of writing dollar amounts, I started writing company names. Florist, rental company, event equipment, moving services, storage unit, different businesses, different years, the same recipient. Rachel Monroe. I tried to remember whether I'd ever spoken to any of these companies. One memory surfaced. A woman calling me during work several years earlier. She'd asked if I wanted to keep the reservation. At the time, I assumed she'd simply dialed the wrong number. I politely told her she must have the wrong Rachel. She apologized and hung up. I had forgotten about it within minutes. Now I wasn't so sure it had been a mistake. My phone buzzed on the desk. This time, it actually was Melissa. Just one text. "Any chance you've made a decision?" I stared at it. Then I locked the screen without answering. Not because I wanted to avoid her, because I no longer felt ready to have that conversation. I needed to understand what I was looking at first. I went back to the oldest email in the folder. Instead of reading the message, I focused on the signature block. Every vendor included a customer summary underneath. Billing contact, phone number, email, sometimes an alternate contact. I clicked one PDF attached to the email, then another. On the second page, beneath the event details, there was a section labeled Primary Contact. I froze for a moment. The name listed there wasn't Melissa's. It wasn't my parents'. It was mine, Rachel Monroe, with my phone number, my email address, and next to it, in bold letters, Primary Contact for all payment questions. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I'd reached any dramatic conclusion. I hadn't. I was simply left with too many questions and not enough answers. By Tuesday morning, I'd decided on one thing. I wasn't going to accuse anyone of anything. If there was a reasonable explanation, I wanted to hear it first. That seemed fair. During a break at work, I opened our family group chat. The conversation had been busy since the night before. Mom had shared a picture of centerpiece ideas. Melissa posted a photo of fabric samples for the table linens. My brother had reacted with a string of thumbs-up emojis. Everyone seemed completely focused on the party. I read through every message before typing. I didn't want my question to sound confrontational, so I kept it as simple as possible. "Hey, could someone send me the full party budget when you get a chance? I'd just like to see the breakdown before I commit to helping." I read it twice. Nothing aggressive, nothing emotional. Then I hit send. For a minute, nothing happened. Then Mom reacted with a heart. Not to answer the question. Just a heart. A few seconds later, my brother sent a laughing emoji under one of Melissa's decoration pictures. The conversation kept moving. No one mentioned my message. I figured they were busy. Maybe someone would answer later. I went back to work. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed again. The group chat had 6 new messages. I opened it. Melissa had uploaded another photo. This one showed a mock-up of the dessert table. Someone commented about how elegant it looked. Dad asked whether chocolate or vanilla would be better for the cake. Mom started discussing seating arrangements. My question had disappeared several messages up the screen, completely ignored. I stared at it for a second. Maybe they hadn't seen it. That happens in busy group chats. So I waited. By the end of the afternoon, there were 14 new messages. Still nothing. Not even, "We'll send it later." Nothing. That bothered me more than I expected. It wasn't the missing budget. It was how easily everyone had stepped around the question without acknowledging it existed. Driving home, I kept telling myself not to overreact. People get distracted. Families wander off topic all the time. I knew that. Still, this felt intentional. Once I got home, I made dinner, turned on some background music, and tried to leave the whole thing alone. About halfway through eating, another notification appeared. Family group. I picked up the phone. Melissa had tagged everyone. Quick reminder, I need final guest count confirmations by Friday. Replies started pouring in. Will be there. Can't wait. Looking forward to it. I watched the messages stack one after another. Finally, I typed again. Also, whenever you have time, I'd still appreciate seeing the budget. This time, I knew everyone saw it, because the typing indicator appeared almost immediately. One bubble, then another. Then it disappeared. Nothing was sent. A few moments later, my brother posted a GIF of someone dancing. Mom responded with laughing emojis. The conversation rolled on as though I'd never spoken. I set my fork down. That awkward feeling from my call with Melissa came back. Except now, it wasn't just Melissa. It felt like the whole family had silently agreed not to touch the subject. I locked my phone and leaned back in my chair. Maybe they genuinely thought I was making a big deal out of nothing. Maybe they believed talking about money would ruin the excitement. Or maybe they simply expected me to stop asking eventually. About 20 minutes later, another notification lit up my screen. Not a reply. Not a budget. Melissa had changed the subject completely. By the way, Chloe found the perfect shoes today. Within seconds, everyone was talking about shoe sizes, dress colors, and matching accessories. My question stayed exactly where it was, unanswered, buried higher and higher as the conversation moved on. My phone kept lighting up long after I'd stopped participating in the conversation. At first, I ignored it. I washed the dishes, packed my lunch for the next day, and tried to focus on ordinary things instead of staring at a group chat that was clearly going nowhere. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up my phone again. The discussion had drifted away from the party entirely. Now everyone was talking about how busy life had become. My younger brother joked that none of us saw each other enough anymore. Mom replied with a sad emoji and wrote, "Families shouldn't have to schedule time to care about each other." That sentence lingered in my mind. I almost typed, "I agree." Instead, I kept reading. A few minutes later, my brother tagged me. "Rachel's the busy one now." Melissa immediately replied, "Seriously, we have to book an appointment just to talk to her." A couple of laughing emojis followed. Normally, I would have laughed too. I've worked in financial compliance for years, and some weeks really are packed with meetings, audits, and deadlines. But this felt different, because just a few hours earlier I'd asked one simple question. No one answered it. Now they suddenly had plenty to say about me. I decided not to let it become a bigger issue. "I'm happy to make time," I replied. I was just hoping to see the party budget first. There it was again. The question. Simple. Direct. Respectful. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. I waited. Melissa answered first. "You've gotten so corporate." Before I could respond, my brother added, "Everything doesn't have to be a spreadsheet." Mom chimed in with, "Sometimes people just want support, sweetheart." I stared at the screen. No one had actually answered what I'd asked. Not one number, not one estimate, not even a rough total. Just comments about my personality. I set the phone on the table and rubbed the bridge of my nose. That was something we used to joke about when I first started my career. If I asked too many questions at Thanksgiving, someone would tease me for being the auditor. Back then it was harmless. Tonight it didn't feel harmless anymore. It felt like every request for clarity was being turned into evidence that I'd somehow changed. Had I? I honestly considered the possibility. Maybe I had become more cautious over the years. Maybe working around financial regulations every day had made me less trusting. That seemed possible. But asking for a budget before sending nearly $7,000, that didn't feel unreasonable. Not to me. I picked up the phone again. Melissa had posted another message. Remember when Rachel never made us fill out paperwork? More laughing emojis. Dad finally joined the conversation. Success changes people. That one landed harder than I expected. Success? I still drove the same car. I still lived in the same apartment. I packed my own lunches most days because I was saving for a townhouse. Nothing about my life felt extravagant. The only thing that had changed was that I had started asking one question nobody wanted to answer. I typed a reply, then erased it. Typed another. Deleted that one too. There wasn't anything I could say that wouldn't sound defensive. A few quiet minutes passed before another notification appeared. This time, it wasn't sent to the group. It came directly from Melissa. No text. Just a photo. I opened it. Chloe was sitting in what looked like a dress-fitting appointment. She was smiling politely at the camera, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The boutique employee stood beside her holding a measuring tape, while half-finished dresses hung in the background. A few seconds later, Melissa sent a single sentence beneath the picture. She only turned 17 once. I kept looking at the photo long after Melissa stopped typing. At first glance, it looked exactly like the kind of picture proud parents post all the time. A beautiful dress, soft lighting, a smiling teenager getting ready for a milestone birthday. But the longer I looked, the less I paid attention to the dress. I was looking at Chloe. I've known her since the day she was born. I was the aunt who babysat when Melissa worked late, the one who helped with math homework over video calls, the one who took her out for pancakes after report cards, whether the grades were good or bad. I knew her expressions, and this wasn't her excited smile. It was the smile she wore when she didn't want to disappoint someone. I zoomed in on the picture. One hand was holding the side of the dress, the other was gripping her phone. Her shoulders looked stiff. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't showing the goofy excitement she'd had as a kid, whenever something truly made her happy. Maybe I was reading too much into a single photograph. That thought crossed my mind immediately. Pictures freeze 1 second. People blink. They get tired. They look awkward. I knew all of that. Still, something about her expression stayed with me. I typed a reply to Melissa. She looks beautiful. That part was true. Then I added another sentence. Is Chloe excited about all of this? I watched the message send. Several minutes passed. Melissa finally answered. Of course she is. Nothing else. No story about the dress fitting. No comment about Chloe picking it herself. No funny detail. Just 4 words. I locked my phone and leaned back on the couch. The apartment felt unusually quiet again. I tried watching television for a while, but I realized 10 minutes had passed without me following anything that was happening on the screen. My mind kept returning to Chloe. Not the party. Her. I remembered taking her to a bookstore for her 15th birthday. She'd spent almost an hour deciding between 2 novels because she didn't want me spending too much money. I'd laughed and told her to pick both. She looked genuinely happier in that little bookstore than she did in the expensive boutique from Melissa's picture. That memory made me pause. Chloe had never been flashy. She liked photography, secondhand bookstores, coffee shops with old couches, movie nights at home. A luxury country club party didn't really sound like her. Maybe she'd changed over the last couple of years. Teenagers do. But I wasn't convinced. The next morning, while driving to work, I caught myself thinking about something Melissa had said days earlier. She only turned 17 once. That was true. But turning 17 and wanting a huge celebration weren't necessarily the same thing. During lunch, I almost texted Chloe directly. My thumb hovered over her contact. Then I stopped. If there was tension building between Melissa and me, I didn't want Chloe caught in the middle. She deserved better than becoming the messenger between adults. I slipped the phone back into my bag. If I wanted to understand what was really happening, there was probably a better place to start. My mother. She usually knew what everyone was thinking, even if she didn't always say it outright. And unlike Melissa, She tended to soften difficult conversations instead of escalating them. If anyone could tell me whether this party was really Chloe's dream or something else entirely, it would probably be Mom. That evening, after sitting with the idea for a while, I scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. I rested my thumb over the call button for a second. Then I pressed it and waited for her to answer. Mom answered on the fourth ring. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice immediately sounded warm, the way it always did. For a second, I almost abandoned the conversation I'd planned. We talked about ordinary things first, how work had been, the weather, a neighbor she'd run into at the grocery store. It felt normal, comfortable. Eventually, she asked the question I knew was coming. "So, have you talked to Melissa?" "I have." There was a brief pause. "How did it go?" I let out a quiet breath. Not the way I expected. Mom didn't interrupt. She never did. That was one of the things I appreciated about her. "I asked to see the budget before I committed to helping," I said. "That's all I asked. And no one will actually show it to me." She stayed quiet for another moment. I could hear dishes clinking in the background. She was probably cleaning the kitchen while we talked. Finally, she said, "Maybe everyone's just overwhelmed." I understand being overwhelmed. I wasn't trying to argue. I just don't understand why asking for numbers suddenly became offensive. Mom sighed. "You know your sister. Planning this party has been stressful." "I know." "And she probably feels embarrassed." "Embarrassed about what?" "About needing help." I thought about that. It made some sense. If Melissa already felt uncomfortable asking for money, maybe she avoided talking about details because they made the situation feel even more real. "I don't want to embarrass her," I said. "I really don't." "I know you don't." Her answer came quickly. "I know your heart." That softened me a little. For the first time in days, I felt like someone understood I wasn't trying to ruin anything. "I'm happy to help," I told her. "I just need transparency, especially when it's this much money." Mom hummed quietly. Then she said something that caught me off guard. "Rachel, sometimes the strongest person in the family has to give a little more." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're stable. You've always been responsible. You've been blessed with a good career." She spoke gently, not accusingly, almost as if she believed she was comforting me. "Your sister has had a harder road." "I know she has. And because you've always handled things so well." She hesitated. "Sometimes it's easier for everyone if you bend a little." I stared through the window toward the parking lot outside my apartment. Cars came and went. People carried groceries inside. Life kept moving. "Mom," I said carefully, "do you hear what you're asking?" "What do you mean?" "I'm asking for a budget. I'm not refusing to help. I'm asking for information. I know. But maybe this isn't the moment to insist." Her words weren't harsh. That almost made them harder to hear, because they sounded so reasonable, so calm, as though my request itself was the problem. I rested my elbow on the kitchen counter. I've helped before. So many times. I never made anyone feel guilty. "No, you didn't. And I don't want to start now." Silence settled between us. Then Mom spoke again. "You've always been the dependable one." The dependable one. Not Rachel, not her daughter, not Chloe's aunt. The dependable one. It sounded less like a compliment and more like a role I'd been assigned years ago. "I just don't want this family fighting over money," she added quietly. "Neither do I." That part was completely true. We ended the call politely. No raised voices, no dramatic goodbye. Just, "I love you." "I love you too." When the call ended, I set my phone on the counter and stood there without moving. Mom had never told me to hand over the money, not directly. She hadn't criticized me. She hadn't even defended Melissa. Instead, she'd said one sentence that kept replaying in my mind. Sometimes the strongest person in the family has to give a little more. I carried my mug into the living room, but I couldn't focus on the book I'd planned to read. The sentence followed me. Into the kitchen. Back to the couch. Even while I brushed my teeth before bed. Not because it sounded wise, because the more I thought about it, the more I wondered whether being the strongest had quietly become another way of saying I was expected to carry whatever everyone else decided to put on my shoulders. Mom's words stayed with me through the rest of the week. Not because I agreed with them, because they made me look backward instead of forward. I wasn't thinking about the birthday party anymore. I was thinking about the pattern. Friday morning, while waiting for my coffee to brew, I opened my message history with different family members. Not to collect evidence, just to remind myself what our conversations had actually looked like over the years. The first few exchanges were exactly what I expected. Can I borrow? Do you think you could help? We're in a tough spot. I hate asking, but there were birthday wishes, holiday greetings, pictures from family dinners. But when I kept scrolling, something quietly stood out. Most conversations eventually circled back to a problem that needed solving. Sometimes it was money, sometimes paperwork, sometimes filling out insurance forms because I was good with that kind of stuff, sometimes reviewing loan documents before someone signed them. I didn't mind doing any of those things. In fact, I was glad people trusted me. Or at least, I thought they trusted me. I switched to another conversation. Melissa. Years of messages filled the screen. She sent plenty of photos of Chloe growing up, school plays, soccer games, Christmas mornings. I smiled at several of them. There had always been love in our family. That part was real. But I noticed something else. Whenever there was a major decision, I usually wasn't invited into the conversation until someone needed help making it happen. The apartment had already been chosen. Then I was asked about the deposit. The car had already been purchased. Then I was asked about repair costs. Trips were already booked. Then someone needed help covering an unexpected expense. Now, the birthday venue had already been reserved. The decorations selected. The entertainment planned. Only after all those decisions had been made did someone ask me for nearly $7,000. I sat quietly for a minute. No one had ever said, "Rachel, what do you think?" Not before committing to something expensive. Not before signing contracts. Not before making promises. My opinion seemed valuable only after money became part of the conversation. That realization stung more than I expected. I wasn't looking for control. I didn't want to plan everyone's lives. But if I was expected to help finance major decisions, was it unreasonable to think I should have been included before those decisions became final? At lunch, one of my coworkers noticed I'd barely touched my sandwich. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah." "You sure?" I smiled. "Just family stuff." She laughed softly. "Those are usually the hardest spreadsheets to balance." I laughed too. Mostly because she had no idea how accurate that sounded. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. I finished my reports, answered emails, sat through 2 meetings, but my mind kept circling back to Chloe. Everyone else seemed focused on the party. I kept wondering about the person the party was supposedly for. Had anyone actually asked what she wanted? Or had the adults simply decided for her? By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to ask Melissa again. Not yet. And I wasn't going to bring Mom into the middle of it either. There was one person I genuinely wanted to hear from. Chloe. Not because I expected her to solve anything, just because I trusted her to be honest. I opened our text conversation. The last messages were from a few months earlier. She'd sent me pictures from a photography class. I'd replied by telling her how proud I was. Simple, easy, nothing about money. I smiled. That felt refreshing. I typed a message. Hey kiddo, got a few minutes to catch up sometime this weekend? No party talk. I'd just love to hear how you're doing. I read it once before sending. It didn't mention the budget. It didn't mention Melissa. It didn't put Chloe in the middle of an argument she hadn't created. A minute passed. Then another. Finally, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was an incoming call. From Chloe. Hi, Aunt Rachel. Chloe sounded almost relieved that I'd answered. Hey, kiddo. I got your message. I hope I wasn't bothering you? You never bother me. She laughed softly. I was actually hoping you'd text. That caught me off guard. We talked for a few minutes about school, her photography class, and the part-time job she'd recently started at a local bookstore. The conversation felt easy, like it always had. Then she asked, Are you busy tomorrow? Not really. Would you want to get coffee? I'd love that. She paused for a second. Just us? Just us. The next afternoon, we met at a small neighborhood cafe we'd been going to for years. It wasn't fancy. It had mismatched chairs, handwritten menu boards, and the kind of staff who remembered regular customers. Chloe walked in wearing jeans, sneakers, and a loose sweatshirt. Nothing about her looked like someone counting down the days to a luxury birthday party. She smiled as soon as she saw me. I stood and gave her a hug. You've gotten taller again. I hope not. She laughed. I'm already taller than Mom. We ordered drinks and found a table near the window. For the first 20 minutes, we barely mentioned the party. She showed me pictures she'd taken around town. Old brick buildings, rain on sidewalks, a stray cat that apparently visited the bookstore every afternoon. You've gotten really good, I told her. She smiled. Thanks. I think I finally found something I'm actually good at. I've known that for a while. She rolled her eyes. You have to say that. You're my aunt. No. I laughed. I say it because it's true. Her smile this time looked real. Not forced like the one in the dress shop photo. Eventually, the conversation slowed. She stirred her iced tea without looking at me. I guess. She hesitated. I guess you probably want to ask about the party. I only want to ask if you're okay talking about it. She nodded. I am. I waited. I didn't want her to feel interrogated. After a long sip of her drink, she shrugged. It's gotten really big. What do you mean? It started as dinner. Dinner? Yeah. She smiled a little. I told Mom I wanted everyone together before graduation gets crazy next year. Just family? And maybe 4 or 5 friends. That sounds nice. I thought so. She laughed quietly. Then somebody suggested renting a room. Then someone else mentioned a DJ. Then decorations. Then a dessert table. She counted everything on her fingers like she was describing a chain reaction she hadn't been able to stop. I kind of lost track after that. I looked at her carefully. So, what would you choose if nobody else's opinion mattered? She answered so quickly it almost surprised me. Pizza. I blinked. She laughed. I'm serious. Pizza? And brownies. No fancy cake? She shook her head. No country club? Another shake. I'd rather spend a few hours with people I actually get to talk to. She looked out the window before continuing. I don't even like huge parties. I get nervous when everyone's looking at me. That sounded exactly like Chloe. Not because she lacked confidence, because she'd always preferred meaningful conversations over being the center of attention. I hope this doesn't make me sound ungrateful, she said. It doesn't. I know everyone's trying really hard. She searched for the right words. I wish everyone would stop arguing. There it was. Not disappointment over the party, not excitement about luxury decorations, just exhaustion. She looked down at the table. I heard Mom talking on the phone. My attention sharpened. She didn't know I was upstairs. What did you hear? I don't know everything. She shook her head quickly. I wasn't trying to listen. But I heard your name. I stayed quiet. And I heard her say, Chloe swallowed. That once you helped, everything would be okay. She looked embarrassed saying it out loud. I didn't like hearing that. Neither did I. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. This isn't your responsibility. I know. She nodded. I just wish my birthday didn't feel like homework for everybody else. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe buzzed around us. Someone laughed near the counter. Coffee cups clinked together. It all felt strangely normal. Then one thought settled into place more clearly than it ever had before. This party wasn't growing because Chloe kept asking for more. It was growing because the adults around her kept making it bigger. And for the first time since Melissa's message arrived, I realized I might have been asking the wrong question all along. Chloe kept turning the straw in her glass between her fingers. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was watching the ice slowly melt. I've been meaning to ask you something, she said quietly. Anything. She hesitated. Is everybody fighting because of me? The question hit me harder than I expected. No, I answered immediately. No, sweetheart, this isn't because of you. She gave me a small smile, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. It kind of feels like it. I leaned forward. Tell me why. She sighed. A couple of nights ago, I walked downstairs to get a glass of water. She paused for a moment. Mom didn't know I was there. I heard her talking to Grandma. What did they say? I couldn't hear everything. But I heard my name. And yours. She looked embarrassed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I know. I heard Mom say that everything would work out once you helped. She looked down again. I just went back upstairs. I didn't interrupt. I kept thinking. She shrugged. If everyone needs Aunt Rachel to fix this, then maybe the party shouldn't be happening. For a second, neither of us spoke. The cafe suddenly felt much louder than before. A blender started behind the counter. Someone laughed near the entrance. Life carried on around us while Chloe quietly blamed herself for something she had never asked for. I reached across the table again. You didn't create this situation. I know. But it still feels weird. She smiled awkwardly. I don't even know how much this party costs. That surprised me. You don't? She shook her head. I've never asked. I figured Mom had a budget. I almost smiled at the word. Budget. The one thing nobody else seemed willing to talk about. I only found out it was becoming a really big party because people kept asking me about dresses and decorations. She laughed softly. My friend Emma asked if there was really going to be a live band. Was there? I guess. She shrugged. I didn't even know until she asked. That simple sentence told me more than I expected. Chloe wasn't directing this celebration. She was following it, as if the plans had gathered momentum on their own. I feel bad, she admitted. About what? You. I frowned. Why me? Because Mom keeps saying how generous you've always been. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. I don't ever want you to think I expect things from you. You've never made me feel that way. I mean it. I know. She looked relieved to hear that. You've always been my favorite aunt. I laughed. I'm your only aunt. Exactly. We both laughed this time, and the tension eased for a moment. It reminded me of all the afternoons we'd spent together over the years. Board games, movie nights, teaching her how to drive in an empty parking lot. None of those memories had anything to do with expensive gifts. They were just time. Real time together. As we finished our drinks, Chloe looked at me again. Can I ask one more thing? Of course. If the party ends up being smaller, she searched my face. Would everybody be disappointed? I thought carefully before answering. Some people might. She nodded slowly. But the people who are there because they love you? I smiled. They'll celebrate you anywhere. A backyard, a pizza place, a country club. It won't change why they came. She let out a long breath, almost like she'd been carrying that question for weeks. When we stood to leave, she hugged me longer than usual. Thanks for listening. Always. I watched her climb into her mom's car across the parking lot. Melissa waved politely from the driver's seat. I waved back. Neither of us walked over. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted the quiet. Not because I felt overwhelmed, because everything looked different now. For days, I'd been treating this like a disagreement about money. It wasn't. Money was only the surface. Underneath it was something much harder to ignore. An entire family making decisions in Chloe's name. Without ever stopping to ask what Chloe actually wanted. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't thinking about whether I should pay for the party. I was thinking about what kind of conversation needed to happen before anyone spent another dollar. I spread everything across my dining table the moment I got home. The conversation with Chloe stayed with me the whole drive back. She hadn't sounded spoiled. She hadn't sounded demanding. If anything, she'd sounded embarrassed. That changed the way I looked at every document sitting in front of me. I opened my laptop, grabbed a notebook, and made myself a cup of coffee I barely touched. This wasn't about the birthday anymore. I needed to understand the bigger picture. For years, I'd kept digital folders for tax purposes, bank statements, credit card summaries, payment confirmations, email receipts. I never organized them because I expected to use them one day. I just never imagined that day would be for my own family. I created a new spreadsheet. Date, amount, reason, who asked, how it was paid, whether it had ever been returned. It felt strangely familiar. This was the kind of work I did every day as a financial compliance analyst. Only this time, the numbers belonged to my own life. The first few entries didn't surprise me. Melissa's transmission repair, Dad's emergency roof leak, Mom's dental procedure that insurance didn't fully cover, a semester payment for my younger brother years ago. I remembered every conversation. I'll pay you back after tax season. Just until next month. I hate asking, Rach. I wouldn't ask if we had another option. At the time, I believed every one of them. I wasn't angry remembering those moments. Honestly, some of them had been real emergencies. Some of them probably saved my family from bigger problems. I had never regretted helping. What caught my attention wasn't any single payment. It was how many there were. The spreadsheet kept growing, page after page, year after year. Whenever life became difficult for someone else, my account somehow became part of the solution. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. How many times has this happened? I whispered it without expecting an answer. I kept going. Apartment security deposit, moving truck, car insurance deductible, medical bills, school activity fees, a broken furnace during winter, credit card payoff, temporary childcare. Every few rows I'd remember exactly where I was when someone called. At work, in the grocery store, right before boarding a flight. Even during one vacation I'd finally taken after years of saving vacation days. The requests had blended into normal life so completely that I stopped noticing them. What surprised me most wasn't the money, it was my own response. I almost never asked questions. I'd simply transferred the funds, sometimes within minutes. I smiled a little, though it wasn't really a happy smile. I made this easy. That realization stung more than I expected. Nobody had forced me. Nobody had hacked my accounts. I had volunteered. Again and again. Because every time I hesitated, someone reminded me that family helps family, so I helped. Hours slipped by. Outside my window, the neighborhood slowly became quiet. My coffee turned cold. The spreadsheet reached dozens of rows. I started noticing another pattern. There were almost no written agreements, No repayment schedules, no shared budgets. Sometimes there wasn't even a text saying thank you afterward. Just another request weeks later. I opened old message threads to refresh my memory. One conversation made me stop. Melissa had written years ago, "Can you cover this one? I'll make it up to you." I searched the following months. There wasn't a single message mentioning repayment. Instead, 3 months later, she'd texted again. "Hey, can you help one more time?" I closed my eyes for a second. I genuinely couldn't remember feeling resentful back then. Helping had become part of who I was. Maybe that's why nobody ever questioned it, including me. I highlighted another payment, then another. I kept expecting to reach the end. Instead, the list seemed to grow every time I scrolled farther back. 11 years. That's a long time for habits to become invisible. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed, a text from a coworker asking if I wanted to join lunch the next day. I almost laughed. It was such a normal message. No favor, no emergency, no money, just someone checking in. I replied yes almost immediately. Then I looked back at my spreadsheet. The final total appeared automatically at the bottom of the page. I stared at it for several seconds. $44,280. I checked the formula twice because surely I'd made a mistake. I hadn't. $44,280. I whispered the number out loud. It didn't even sound real. That amount could have covered a huge part of my townhouse down payment. It could have stayed invested. It could have changed my own financial timeline years ago. Instead, it had quietly disappeared one transfer at a time. I wasn't thinking about getting it back. That wasn't the point. The empty reimbursement column stayed on my screen long after I stopped typing. I wasn't looking at numbers anymore. I was looking at 11 years of habits. I took a fresh page from my notebook and wrote something different across the top. Timing, not amounts, not people, just timing. If my job had taught me anything, it was that patterns usually explained more than isolated events. I highlighted every time I'd made a large transfer. Then I opened another folder where I tracked my own financial goals. I'd been doing that for years. Vacation savings, emergency fund, retirement contributions, the townhouse account. It wasn't complicated. I just liked seeing progress. At first, I assumed there wouldn't be any connection. Then something caught my eye. 3 years ago, I'd finally saved enough for a larger emergency fund. That same week, Melissa had called about unexpected apartment repairs. I remembered sending the money without thinking twice. I marked it. A year later, I had almost finished paying off my car. Dad needed help replacing his furnace before winter. Another transfer. Another delay. I marked that one too. I kept going. When I reached the point where I'd almost started investing more aggressively, Mom had medical bills insurance wouldn't fully cover. Then came my brother's move. Another credit card issue. Another, just until next month. Each one sounded reasonable on its own. That's what made this so difficult. None of the requests had seemed outrageous in the moment. Life happens. Cars break down. People get sick. Families help. I still believed all of that. But seeing everything lined up on one timeline felt different. Every single time my own finances became stable enough for me to move forward. Something pulled me backward. I leaned closer to the screen. No. I opened my townhouse savings history. The balance climbed steadily. Dropped suddenly. Recovered. Dropped again. Recovered. Paused. Recovered. It looked less like a savings account and more like someone driving with one foot on the gas and the other on the brake. I wasn't blaming anyone for every setback. Some emergencies had been real. Some absolutely deserved help. What hurt was realizing nobody had ever asked where I stood financially before asking for money. No one had said, "Can you actually afford this?" Or, "Will this delay your own plans?" The assumption was always the same. Rachel will figure it out. Rachel always does. I stood up and stretched my back. The apartment was quiet except for the dishwasher humming in the kitchen. I walked over to refill my water bottle and caught my own reflection in the dark window. I looked tired. Not because of work, because I was replaying conversations I'd never questioned before. I remembered telling Melissa once that I wanted to buy my own place before turning 36. She'd smiled. "You'll get there. You're good with money." At the time, I'd taken it as encouragement. Now I realized something. Nobody had ever connected my delays to the money I'd constantly given away. It was almost as if my goals existed in one world, and everyone else's needs existed in another. Mine could always wait. Theirs couldn't. I sat back down and reopened the family group chat. Messages filled with birthday photos, holiday dinners, funny memes, mixed between them. Requests. Can anyone help? I hate asking. We're in a tight spot. Just this once. I counted without meaning to. The phrase, "just this once," had appeared more times than I could remember. My phone buzzed. Melissa had posted another update. "The decorator says we need to confirm everything by Friday. So excited." Several relatives reacted with heart emojis. Someone commented, "Chloe deserves the best." I stared at the screen. Nobody mentioned paying for it. Nobody mentioned the budget. Nobody mentioned the fact that Melissa had asked me for almost $7,000 only days earlier. It was as though those were completely separate conversations. I closed the chat without replying. Instead, I opened the email folder where I'd been finding old receipts. I searched one word: birthday. Several old messages appeared. Most were from previous family celebrations, gift receipts, restaurant reservations. Nothing unusual. Then I searched Chloe's full name. A new email appeared near the top of the list. The sender wasn't Melissa. It was the country club hosting the party. The subject line read, "Event reservation confirmation." I frowned. I didn't remember ever opening it. Curious now, I clicked the email and waited for the attached contract to load. The contract took a few seconds to open. I expected to skim through it, confirm the total, maybe finally understand why Melissa needed so much money. Instead, I found myself reading every page. The event was scheduled at an upscale country club about 40 minutes from where Melissa lived. The guest count was much higher than I'd imagined. Premium dinner service, live band, custom floral installations, professional photographer, dessert station, late-night snack bar. Every item had a price beside it. I quietly added the numbers in my head. No wonder she'd asked for nearly $7,000. The total was even higher than that. I scrolled farther. Payment schedule, deposit received, final balance due, cancellation policy. Everything looked like a standard event contract. Then I reached the signature page. My eyes stopped moving. Under financial guarantor, there was a name: Rachel Monroe. I blinked. No. I leaned closer to the screen. Maybe it was another Rachel Monroe. Maybe I was opening the wrong file. I checked the event date. Chloe's birthday. I checked the venue. The same country club Melissa had mentioned. I checked the email recipient. Mine. There was no mistake. I kept reading. Below my name was my work email. Not Melissa's. Mine. I frowned so hard my forehead actually hurt. I didn't remember filling out this paperwork. I didn't remember authorizing anyone to list me as the financial guarantor. I searched the document for Melissa's name. It appeared as the event organizer, but the section covering financial responsibility pointed back to me. My heartbeat picked up. How did this happen? I opened the attachment properties, wondering if maybe it had been forwarded to me by accident. Nothing suggested that. The document had been sent directly to my inbox weeks ago. I searched my email again. More messages appeared from the same venue: reminder of upcoming payment, updated guest count, menu confirmation. Every email addressed me by name. Hello, Rachel. We're looking forward to your event. Please review the attached invoice. I never answered any of them. Apparently, I never even opened them. I clicked another attachment. This one listed vendor contacts, country club, florist, photographer, entertainment company, cake designer. Each reservation showed the same billing contact, Rachel Monroe. I pushed my chair back, not because I wanted to stand, because I suddenly needed space to think. Had Melissa entered my information because she assumed I'd be paying anyway? Was it temporary? Was it a mistake? Or had someone actually believed I had agreed to guarantee all of this? I refused to jump to conclusions. That's one rule I'd always followed at work. Verify first, react second. So I started comparing documents. The florist invoice listed my mobile number. Correct. The photographer agreement showed my email. Correct. The catering estimate listed the last 4 digits of a credit card. I froze again. Those numbers looked familiar. I opened my online credit card account. The last 4 digits matched. I swallowed hard. The card wasn't charged for the full amount. Not yet. Only the initial authorization appeared. A small pending transaction from several weeks earlier. Just enough to hold the reservation. I genuinely couldn't remember approving it. Maybe I'd clicked something too quickly. Maybe Melissa had asked me verbally months ago and I'd forgotten. I searched my text messages. Nothing. I searched my calendar. Nothing. No notes. No reminders. No record of agreeing to become financially responsible for an entire birthday celebration. I looked back at the contract. The cancellation deadline was still several days away. That detail stuck in my mind. Not because I planned to cancel anything, because deadlines mattered, especially financial ones. My phone vibrated across the table. Unknown number. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Hello? Hi, may I speak with Rachel Monroe? This is Rachel. Wonderful. I'm calling from Evergreen Country Club regarding Chloe's birthday celebration. My stomach tightened. The woman sounded cheerful, professional, like we had spoken many times before. We're just touching base about the remaining balance. We wanted to make sure everything is still on schedule. I didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched just long enough for her to notice. Ms. Monroe? I finally found my voice. I'm looking at the paperwork right now. Oh, perfect, she said warmly. If you have any questions before the final payment is processed, I'd be happy to help. I looked back down at the contract. My name was still sitting there, exactly where it shouldn't have been. I have a couple of questions before we go any further, I told the woman from the country club. Of course. I'm reviewing the contract, and I wasn't aware I was listed as the financial guarantor. There was a brief pause. Oh, she said carefully, I can't speak to how your family handled that internally. I can only confirm that you're the primary financial contact in our system. I understand. If the responsible party needs to be changed, we'll need authorization and updated paperwork before the final payment date. That wasn't the answer I was hoping for. Still, her tone stayed polite. Professional. She wasn't causing the problem. She was simply explaining it. I thanked her for her time and ended the call. For a minute, I just sat there looking at my phone. My first instinct wasn't to cancel anything. It wasn't even to argue. I wanted to fix it. That had always been my default setting. Find the problem, build a solution, help everyone move forward. So instead of calling Melissa angry, I grabbed my notebook and started doing what I did best. I built a budget. I listed every vendor, the ballroom, the catering package, the florist, the photographer, the live band. Then I started making adjustments. Did they really need premium centerpieces on every table? Probably not. Could the guest list be reduced? Almost certainly. Did a 17-year-old need both a dessert bar and a late-night snack station? That one practically answered itself. The more I worked, the more manageable everything became. Within 45 minutes, I'd cut thousands of dollars without turning the celebration into something cheap. It still looked like a beautiful party. Just realistic. I even added a second option. A backyard celebration similar to what Chloe had quietly described at the cafe. That version cost a fraction of the original. I smiled for the first time that evening. Maybe this didn't have to become a family war. Maybe everyone simply needed someone willing to organize the numbers. I called Melissa. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, did you finally decide to help?" Her voice was upbeat, confident, like she'd been expecting good news. "I've been looking through the contracts." "Oh, good. I also made a revised budget." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I think we can still give Chloe a wonderful birthday without putting anyone under this much financial pressure." She laughed softly, not in a happy way. In that familiar way people laugh when they think someone is overcomplicating something. "Rachel, just hear me out. I already did the math. If we reduce the guest list a little and simplify a few of the extras, the whole event becomes much more affordable." Silence, I continued. "We don't have to cancel anything. We just need to scale it back." Another silence. Then Melissa sighed. "You always do this." I frowned. "Do what?" "You turn everything into a spreadsheet." "I'm trying to solve the problem." "There wasn't a problem until you started making one." I blinked. "I thought the problem was that you needed almost $7,000. We needed support. And I'm offering support." "No," she replied. "You're offering conditions." I looked down at the notebook filled with careful calculations. Conditions? It felt more like responsibility. "I'm not refusing to help," I said as calmly as I could. "I'm asking us to work within what everyone can actually afford." "Everyone?" "Yes." She let out another quiet laugh. "Rachel, families don't sit around negotiating like business partners." "No," I answered gently. "But they should probably know who's paying for what." The line went quiet again. I thought maybe she was considering what I'd said. Instead, she changed the subject. "Chloe only turned 17 once." "I know. I want her to have something she'll never forget." "I do too." "Then why are you trying to take things away?" That question landed harder than I expected. Because from where I was sitting, I wasn't taking anything away. I was trying to keep the celebration from becoming a financial disaster. I took a slow breath. "What if we met tomorrow? We can look at the budget together." "I don't need to look at a budget." "Melissa, I already know what kind of party my daughter deserves." "I'm talking about what we can realistically manage." She cut me off before I could finish. "If you have to calculate every act of kindness, maybe you've forgotten what family means." The words hung between us. Not shouted, not dramatic, just firm. I realized we weren't arguing about a birthday anymore. We were talking about two completely different ways of seeing money. To me, planning protected relationships. To Melissa, planning somehow cheapened them. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked quietly, "So, you're not even willing to look at the revised budget?" Her answer came without hesitation. "No." I didn't hang up right away. Neither did Melissa. The silence between us felt heavier than the argument itself. Finally, I said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can." "When you planned this party, did you ever stop and ask whether I was able to take this on?" She let out a quiet sigh. "I knew you'd find a way." That answer landed harder than anything else she'd said. Not because it was cruel, because she sounded completely sincere. She wasn't trying to manipulate me. She genuinely believed I would make it work, the same way everyone always assumed I would. "I've been saving for my townhouse," I reminded her. "I know. If I cover this, I'm delaying that goal again." "It's only a delay." I looked down at the folder sitting beside my laptop. 11 years of delays. One by one, they hadn't seemed like much. Together, they looked different. I don't think you understand what only a delay has meant over the years. Melissa didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice softened just a little. Rachel, you're good with money. I work hard with money. Exactly. No, I corrected gently. Those aren't the same thing. Another pause. She sounded tired now. So what are you saying? You're done helping your family? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying helping shouldn't mean signing up for obligations I didn't agree to. I already told you why that happened. You actually haven't. She hesitated. For the reservation? Yes. The venue wanted someone with stronger credit. There it was. The first real explanation I'd received. Not a complete one, but finally, an explanation. So you gave them my information. I knew you'd be involved anyway. You assumed. I knew. No, I said quietly. You hoped. She sounded frustrated again. Rachel, why are we stuck on paperwork? Because the paperwork makes me legally responsible. It's just paperwork. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because if anyone at my office had said those words during a compliance review, the meeting would have stopped immediately. Nothing was ever just paperwork. Paperwork created responsibility. Responsibility created consequences. I don't think we're talking about the same thing anymore. What do you mean? I think when you hear budget, you hear me saying no. And aren't you? No. I'm asking for transparency. She sighed loudly enough for me to hear it through the phone. Everything has become so transactional with you. I leaned back in my chair. Do you know what feels transactional to me? What? Feeling valuable only when I'm paying for something. She didn't respond. For the first time during the conversation, neither of us seemed to know what to say. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was finally saying something I'd never admitted out loud. She broke the silence. I think you've let your job change you. That surprised me. My job? You're always auditing people now. I'm not auditing you. It feels like it. I looked at the spreadsheet still open on my screen. Maybe it did feel that way from her side. But I hadn't created this situation. I was trying to understand it. I don't think asking where the money is going is unreasonable. You didn't used to ask. I know. And nobody had a problem. I think I did. She laughed once, a tired, almost defeated laugh. There it is. What? The accountant talking. I'm not an accountant. You know what I mean? Then she said the sentence that made everything suddenly clear. If everything gets treated like a business. She paused. Then it isn't family anymore. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. The line between us. To Melissa, asking questions meant I didn't trust her. To me, asking questions was how trust stayed healthy. Neither of us had crossed into the other's world. Neither of us even seemed able to. Before I could answer, another call came through. Dad. His name flashed across my screen. Melissa noticed the pause. Who's calling? I stared at the incoming call for a moment. Then I answered it. The phone rang less than a minute after Melissa hung up. I almost didn't answer. When I saw Dad's name on the screen, I already knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. Hey, Dad. He didn't waste time. Your sister's upset. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the stack of vendor paperwork spread across my dining table. I didn't upset her. I asked for numbers. A quiet sigh came through the speaker. Rachel, why does everything have to become so complicated? That question sat between us for a second. Because from where I was sitting, I hadn't complicated anything. I had asked the same questions I asked every day at work before approving a payment. I just want to understand what I'm responsible for. You've always helped this family. I know. So why is this different? I looked down at another contract. My name, my phone number, my billing address. None of it had been added by me. It's different because people are signing me up for financial responsibility without asking. Dad didn't answer immediately. Instead, he changed directions. You know your niece has been excited about this birthday for months. I talked to Chloe. Another pause. You talked to her? Yes. And what exactly did she tell you? That she'd be happy with dinner and the family together. Silence. Not angry silence. The kind where someone realizes you've learned something they didn't expect you to know. Dad cleared his throat. She's 16. Kids say things. She sounded pretty certain. Rachel, this isn't really about Chloe anymore. That sentence caught me off guard. If it wasn't about Chloe, then what exactly had everyone been fighting over? Dad answered before I could ask. It's about showing up for family. I am showing up. No. His voice became firmer. You're calculating. I let out a slow breath. Those aren't opposites. They are when it's family. I rubbed my forehead. For years, I would have apologized right there. I would have promised to fix everything before anyone felt uncomfortable. This time I couldn't. Not because I didn't love them. Because I finally understood that solving every financial problem wasn't the same thing as loving someone. Dad continued. People are starting to feel like you've changed since your career took off. I've heard that. Maybe think about why they feel that way. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I had spent the last 11 years finding ways to say yes. The promotions, the longer hours, the careful budgeting. None of those things had made me generous. They had simply made it possible for me to keep saying yes. Somehow, that history had disappeared. I haven't changed as much as you think. Then prove it. His words landed harder than he probably intended. If this party falls apart. He stopped. I waited. People are going to remember who walked away. I stared out the apartment window. Cars rolled through the intersection below like any ordinary evening. Meanwhile, my own family was measuring love against invoices. Dad, I said quietly, if helping means signing contracts I never approved, that's not helping. You're making this sound legal. It is legal. It's family. There shouldn't be a difference. Neither of us spoke. For the first time in my life, I realized we weren't arguing about one birthday party. We were arguing about two completely different definitions of responsibility. He believed love meant sacrificing without asking questions. I believed love could include honesty, boundaries, and accountability. Neither of us convinced the other. Finally, Dad's voice softened. I'm just telling you, if you don't fix this, things won't be the same. The words hurt. A week ago, they would have been enough to make me give in. Now they just made me sad. I don't want to lose my family. Then don't. The call ended. I sat there for several minutes, my phone still in my hand. Then I pulled every vendor contract into one neat stack. The ballroom, the caterer, the photographer, the decorator. Each agreement listed payment dates, deposit deadlines, cancellation windows, late fees. I grabbed a notepad and began writing each deadline in order. If nobody else was paying attention to the calendar, someone had to. When I reached the final contract, my pen stopped moving. The first major payment deadline was much closer than anyone had led me to believe. The first payment deadline was only 4 days away. I looked at the calendar again, thinking maybe I'd read it wrong. I hadn't. If nobody did anything before then, the contracts would move into the next payment stage. After that, cancellation fees would jump dramatically. I opened my laptop and started building a spreadsheet. It was almost instinct at this point. Vendor, deposit paid, remaining balance, cancellation policy, final payment date, penalty. Within 20 minutes, the mess on my dining table had turned into something I could actually analyze. At work, I'd spent years reviewing contracts that people assumed were too complicated to question. Most of the time, they weren't. They just looked intimidating. This wasn't much different. I highlighted the ballroom agreement first. The deposit had already been paid, non-refundable. That wasn't surprising. But another paragraph caught my attention. Cancellation before 30 days required no additional payment beyond the deposit. I checked the calendar again. They were still inside that window. I blinked. Seriously? I pulled the catering contract closer. Same thing. The deposit stayed with the company, but the remaining balance disappeared if the reservation was canceled before a certain date. Next came the florist, then the photographer, then the rental company. Each agreement was slightly different, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Everyone kept talking as if canceling would ruin the family financially. That wasn't true. Losing the deposits would hurt. Paying every remaining invoice would hurt a lot more. I leaned back and let that sink in. This wasn't about saving every dollar. It was about preventing a much bigger financial mistake. I grabbed my calculator. Even assuming every deposit was forfeited, the total loss was only a fraction of the full event cost. Thousands of dollars could still be avoided. I wasn't looking for a reason to cancel Chloe's birthday. I was looking for the least damaging option. There was a difference. For a moment, I imagined sitting down with Melissa again. I'd show her the numbers. We could scale the party back. Keep the venue if possible. Reduce the guest list. Simplify the decorations. Maybe skip the premium catering package. There were dozens of ways to make this work without leaving anyone buried in debt. I actually smiled for the first time in days. There was still a solution. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. My phone buzzed. Melissa had posted another update in the family group chat. A picture of centerpiece samples. Someone replied with heart emojis. Another person commented about how elegant everything looked. No one mentioned budgets. No one mentioned contracts. No one mentioned the payment due in 4 days. I closed the chat without responding. The silence around the money felt louder than any argument we'd had. I went back to the spreadsheet and color-coded every deadline. Green meant flexible. Yellow meant action needed soon. Red meant immediate attention. Only 2 contracts had already crossed into stricter cancellation terms. The rest were still recoverable. That changed everything. If decisions were made now, the financial damage could stay manageable. If everyone waited another week pretending nothing was wrong, the remaining balances would become unavoidable. I thought about Dad's words. "You're making this sound legal." No, I was making it sound organized. There was a difference. Families avoided hard conversations all the time. Contracts didn't. They simply followed dates. I looked at the vendor contact list. Every phone number was sitting there. Every email address. Every account manager. I knew exactly what I needed to ask. Not to cancel anything immediately, just to verify timelines, confirm policies, understand what options still existed before emotions made the decisions instead of facts. My hand rested on my phone for a long second. This wasn't about going behind Melissa's back. If anything, I wanted enough information to give her one last chance to make an informed decision. I scrolled to the first vendor listed on the ballroom contract. The office was probably still open. I took one slow breath, tapped the number, and lifted the phone to my ear as it began to ring. The ballroom coordinator answered on the 3rd ring. "Good afternoon, this is Amanda. How can I help you?" "Hi, my name is Rachel Monroe. I'm listed as the financial guarantor for an event next month. Before I make any decisions, I need to confirm a few details." She pulled up the reservation. Everything I had read was correct. The deposit was non-refundable, but the remaining balance hadn't been charged yet. If the reservation was canceled that day, no additional penalties would apply. I thanked her and asked one more question. If I authorize the cancellation, will it stop any future invoices connected to my name? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Once it's processed, your responsibility ends with the deposit that's already been paid. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. A clean stopping point, not painless, but manageable. I made one more attempt to do this the easy way. I called Melissa, straight to voicemail. I texted her. Please call me before the end of the afternoon. This is important. We still have options if we act today. No response. I waited another 20 minutes. Nothing. I wasn't going to let silence make the decision. I called the ballroom back. I'd like to proceed with the cancellation. Amanda confirmed my identity, reviewed the consequences one last time, and processed the request. When she finished, I didn't feel relieved. I just felt steady. One impossible bill was gone. I moved to the caterer. The conversation was almost identical. Then the decorator. Then the luxury photo package. Not every reservation disappeared. A couple of smaller services had already passed their cancellation window, so I left those alone. But the largest expenses, the ones that would have buried everyone in debt, were no longer hanging over my head. Each confirmation email landed in my inbox one after another. Canceled, 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 canceled. I stared at the screen. This wasn't revenge. If anything, I had just accepted the smallest financial loss available before the damage became permanent. Whether my family saw it that way was another question entirely. I pushed my chair back and walked to the filing cabinet in my home office. Inside was a drawer I rarely opened: personal finances, tax records, loan documents, bank statements. I carried everything to the dining table. For the next 2 hours, I organized every transfer I'd made over the last 11 years. Car repairs, emergency rent, hospital bills, college tuition, apartment deposits, moving expenses, holiday cash, mortgage assistance. The spreadsheet I'd created the night before grew thicker with supporting documents. Every payment had a receipt. Every transfer had a date. Every request had a message attached to it. What surprised me most wasn't the amount anymore. It was how consistent the pattern had been. Someone always needed help. I was always the first person they called, and once the crisis passed, we almost never talked about it again. I slid everything into a blue presentation folder. Not because I planned to shame anyone, because I didn't want another conversation based on feelings alone. If we were finally going to talk honestly, I wanted facts sitting on the table beside us. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "I'd like everyone to come to my house tonight if possible. Around 7. I think we need to talk in person before anything else happens." I hit send. The replies came faster than I'd expected. "What's going on? Is this about the party again? Can't we just talk here?" Melissa read the message but didn't answer. Dad simply wrote, "We'll be there." I looked around my dining room. The blue folder sat neatly in the center of the table. Beside it were copies of contracts, cancellation confirmations, bank records, and 11 years of quiet financial history that nobody else had ever seen collected in one place. For the first time, I wasn't preparing to defend myself. I was preparing to tell the whole story. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Inside, I arranged one more chair at the table. No one in my family had any idea why I had asked them to come, and none of them knew what was waiting inside that blue folder. The doorbell rang exactly at 7. I wasn't surprised. Dad had always been early. When I opened the door, he gave me a quick nod but didn't smile. Mom followed behind him carrying a pie she had probably baked out of habit, not because anyone was in the mood for dessert. Melissa arrived a few minutes later with Chloe. My brothers came almost together, still looking confused about why I'd insisted we meet in person. Nobody noticed the blue folder in the middle of the dining table. Not at first. Small talk lasted less than 2 minutes. Finally, Melissa folded her arms. So, what exactly is this about? I looked around the room. Every face belonged to someone I loved. That was what made this so difficult. I asked everyone here because I don't want to argue through text messages anymore. Nobody interrupted. I also don't want anyone leaving tonight thinking this is only about one birthday party. I reached for the blue folder. You've all heard pieces of the conversation. Tonight I want everyone to see the whole picture. I opened it. The first page was a simple spreadsheet. Date, reason, amount, recipient. 11 years of records. I started putting this together because I honestly couldn't remember how many times I'd helped. I slid the pages across the table. Silence. My oldest brother picked up the first sheet. Melissa looked down at another. Mom adjusted her glasses. One by one, they kept turning the pages. Car repair, hospital bill, apartment deposit, college tuition. Every few seconds, someone quietly read another description. No one joked anymore. I pointed to the total at the bottom of the final page. $44,280. Nobody spoke. I wasn't keeping score. I said quietly. I made this because I needed to understand what was happening. Melissa looked up. I didn't know it was that much. You weren't supposed to. I never asked for all of that. No, I answered gently. You asked for one thing at a time. That sentence seemed to settle over the room. One emergency, one favor, one short-term loan, one unexpected expense. None of them had seemed enormous by themselves. Together, they told a completely different story. I opened another section of the folder. Copies of the party contracts, emails, invoices, vendor contact information. I also found these. Dad frowned. What are those? The contracts for Chloe's birthday. Melissa reached toward them. Before she could speak, I continued. My name was listed as the financial guarantor. Her eyes widened. I thought they just needed a contact person. The contracts don't say contact person. I slid one page toward her. They say guarantor. She read the paragraph herself. I watched her expression change. Confusion, then disbelief, then something closer to regret. I didn't read all of this, she whispered. I believe you. And I never meant, I know. For the first time in weeks, I actually meant those words. I didn't think Melissa had planned to trap me. I thought she'd stopped paying attention because she'd assumed I would always make things work somehow, just like everyone else had. I canceled the major reservations today, I said. The room froze. Dad looked at me. You did what? I canceled the contracts before the next payment deadlines. Melissa stood halfway out of her chair. You canceled Chloe's party? I prevented tens of thousands of dollars in additional charges. There had to be another way. I asked for another way. Nobody answered. I asked for a budget. Silence. I asked for numbers. Still nothing. I asked for a conversation. The only sound in the room was the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Finally, Chloe spoke, very softly. I didn't want the big party anyway. Every head turned toward her. She looked embarrassed, but she kept going. I told Mom I'd rather just have dinner with everyone. Melissa covered her face with one hand. I thought I was giving you something special. I know. Chloe reached over and held her mother's hand. I just wanted everybody to stop fighting. That broke something in the room. Not dramatically. Just enough for everyone to stop defending themselves. Mom quietly wiped at her eyes. One of my brothers stared at the spreadsheet without saying a word. Dad stood up. For a second, I thought he was finally going to say something. Instead, he pushed his chair in. I need some air. He looked at no one in particular. Then he walked out the front door. The house felt strangely empty after it closed behind him. Melissa remained seated across from me, staring at the contracts and the 11 years of records. She opened her mouth once, closed it again, and still, she didn't say a single word. A few months passed. Not enough time to erase what happened. Just enough for the silence to become less sharp. The family group chat stayed unusually quiet for the first couple of weeks. People still shared birthday photos, recipes, and the occasional joke. But something had changed. Nobody asked me to cover an emergency. Nobody hinted that I should help out. The old pattern had finally been interrupted. That didn't mean everything was fixed. Dad and I barely spoke for almost a month. When we did, we stayed on safe topics. The weather. Work. Whether Mom's tomatoes were finally growing. It felt awkward. Honest, but awkward. Melissa took longer. One Saturday afternoon, she called me. "I've been meaning to apologize," she said. I didn't answer right away. She sighed. "I keep replaying everything." "So do I. I really didn't understand what I was asking you to carry." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Her voice cracked just enough for me to notice. "I spent years assuming you'd tell me if it was too much." "I probably should have." "You shouldn't have had to." Neither of us tried to end the conversation with perfect words. There weren't any. Before we hung up, she quietly said, "I'm going to handle my own budget from now on." That was enough. A few weeks later, Chloe's birthday came around. There wasn't a ballroom. No elaborate decorations, no luxury photographer, no 5-course dinner. Instead, everyone gathered in Melissa's backyard, a few folding tables, string lights between 2 trees, a grill in the corner, homemade desserts from neighbors. Someone had put together a playlist of Chloe's favorite songs, and every few minutes everyone laughed because one of the younger cousins kept changing it. It felt normal. The kind of celebration that leaves room for conversation instead of trying to impress everyone. Chloe looked happier than she had in any of the planning photos. She walked over carrying 2 paper plates. She handed me a slice of cake. "This is exactly what I wanted." "I'm glad." "So am I." Nobody mentioned the canceled contracts. Nobody talked about the blue folder. Life slowly found a different rhythm. At work, I kept doing what I'd always done, reviewing reports, questioning numbers, helping companies avoid expensive mistakes. The difference was that I finally applied the same care to my own life. One Friday afternoon, I signed the paperwork for something I'd postponed for years. My own townhouse. Walking through the empty rooms felt strangely quiet. No furniture, no pictures on the walls, just sunlight through the windows and a set of keys in my hand. I'd almost reached this goal several times before. Every time, another family emergency appeared. This time, the closing date actually happened. When I unlocked the front door for the first time, I didn't feel victorious. Mostly, I felt relieved. Relieved that I hadn't abandoned my family. Relieved that I hadn't abandoned myself either. A few days after moving in, my phone buzzed while I was unpacking. It was Chloe. "Aunt Rachel, I wanted to tell you something before school gets busy." Another message appeared. "I used to think expensive things made moments important." Then one more. "Now I think feeling safe is more important." I smiled. She kept typing. "Thank you for showing me that being honest about money isn't selfish. I think it's one of the best birthday gifts I've ever gotten." I read the messages twice before putting my phone down. She hadn't thanked me for canceling a party. She'd thanked me for teaching her something I hadn't learned until I was 34. Late that evening, I set my new townhouse keys on the kitchen counter. A second later, my phone vibrated again. The family group chat. For a brief moment, my stomach tightened out of old habit. I opened it. Melissa had sent the first message. "How about dinner at Mom and Dad's next Sunday?" Nothing fancy, just everyone together. My youngest brother replied with a thumbs up. Mom asked who was bringing dessert. Dad's only response was simple. "I'll grill." No one asked for money. No one mentioned bills. No one hinted that I should fix anything. I looked at the keys on the counter, then back at my phone. A small smile found its way onto my face. Maybe we'd still argue. Maybe holidays would still be awkward. Families rarely change all at once, but for the first time in a very long time, spending time together didn't come with a price tag. Before I end my story, I'd love to hear what you think. If you had been in my place, would you have handled it differently? Have you ever had to set a financial boundary with someone you loved? Let me know in the comments. I read every one of them.